Hello and welcome to Beneath the Surface, where faith and reason meet, where love, and life. Bob, you can say it for me.
Uh, I don't know where you're going with that. I'm
Where,
sorry.
where life, love, and truth are one.
Okay, all right,
You
very
look,
good.
you look beneath the surface, and you'll find that profound truth.
Yes.
Anyway, this is Beneath the Surface, and we're doing a series on my book, Refuting the Nonsense and Reclaiming the Truth, one Socratic dialogue at a time. It's a book of Socratic small dialogues between people speaking about the truths of well, actually, the never-ending truths, but also refuting the nonsense that has been promulgated through our culture in the past 50, not 15, past 50 years. There he is, my guest and yours, Mr. Bob LeBlanc. How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing all right, Paul.
Good, good. Um, so today we are going to review Chapter 5 of Refuting the Nonsense, and that is simply called love. Perhaps the most popular word in the English language, or at least the most loved word, if you will. But of course, as we get into this talk, we will talk about the fact, you can't deny it, that in most languages there is more than one word for what we call love. And of course, in the biblical Greek, which a lot of people are familiar with, there are three words: agape, philia, and eros, for what we encompass in our English word love. And it causes a whole lot of confusion. In fact, I would say the word love, along with perhaps happiness and freedom, are the most misunderstood words of our language today because they've been skewed and transformed into meaning virtually all feelings and no reason or will. You buy that?
Yes, I agree with that. I think it's also at the heart of this, and I'm sure you would agree with this. This is truly a spiritual problem.
Yeah,
Uh, uh, it's and especially when we're talking about things like love and truth. We come into these disorders of the spirit,
yeah,
and we come very much closed off from the truth of things because our
yeah,
heart is hardened. Um,
yeah. And it's funny because love and truth, as you mentioned, are probably the two most important concepts there is, because, of course, they emanate from He who is love, uh, 1 John chapter 4, verse 8, and He who is truth, John 14, chapter 14, verse 6. So, I mean, this is God's very essence, love and truth and love. And it's no wonder that a hardened heart blocks you from understanding what those two most important words mean.
yes, I often reflect on Psalm 51. Uh, uh, Create for me a pure heart, and put in me a right or and steadfast spirit.
Yeah,
That's for all the faults that King David had. You can just see the repentance contained within
yeah,
those words. It's he
yes.
realizes there's something wrong with him, something wrong with
Yeah.
his heart.
And it's
And
interesting because Jesus sort of underscores that in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God.
yes, and
Yeah.
indeed, I've come to kind of see that the more you learn how to love, the more you see the truth more clearly, the more you see God more clearly.
So
It
that is a profound truth. And on that profound truth, let's get to chapter 5, which is called Love. It's on love. And they are a series of dialogues that refute the nonsense of what so many people think to be love today. Now, were there any of these dialogues that sort of maybe jumped out at you, or do you want to talk about?
So yeah, the first two did really kind of jump out at me. The
Oh.
first one is because I'm actually seeing it right now on Facebook. I won't get into the details, but I'm seeing it actually played out.
Ah,
Um,
and that one is called, and that dialogue is called "The Hateful Hater of Haters."
yes, yes,
Can you hate haters, basically, is the question on that one. Before we get to, why don't we talk about this one a little bit before we get to dialogue two? So, what strikes you about that dialogue?
Oh, well, I mean, it's actually appeals to everybody's kind of sense of justice, which is really vengeance.
Yeah,
And you want it, you do, you there's this sense of justice where you want to see injustice punished. And
yeah,
it's and when you hate somebody, you are actually engaging in some sort of injustice. You are not treating or thinking about a person in a rightly ordered fashion in a just way. People are due love.
yeah.
Um,
But this dialogue, of course, is about loving your enemy and
right,
basically loving those who are seemingly unlovable. Now,
right, right,
it almost seems impossible to our fallen nature, but Jesus, of course, wouldn't command something that's impossible. He provides the
right.
grace so that it enables us to love the unlovable, to love our enemies, and pray for those who persecute us.
Yes, I recently went to a lecture. The Thomistic Institute had a professor. I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name off the top of my head, but he was talking about anger,
Yeah.
which is attractive to me because I've always thought of myself struggling with anger. And
Okay.
he made a statement which could needs to be unpacked a little bit, but it's I think you'll grasp it immediately. Um, Anger is a super rational emotion. What he meant by that was that whenever anger takes hold, it actually overrides your intellect. You become actually very, very blinded to the rational.
Yeah.
And that's what and you can see that, especially I think nowadays. You see so many people who have the the anger consuming them so
Yeah.
much and that they can't possibly see the the divine spark within each human being. You
Well,
know,
what's interesting about that is I mentioned the Sermon on the Mount a little while ago. It seems Jesus really emphasizes in the Sermon on the Mount to avoid anger and lust because these are the two things that well up inside that that can take hold of you. And like you said, both cloud reason and both you become a prisoner to.
right,
And
right,
with both, you don't see the object as a subject. You don't see them as a person and you don't care about their good. You see them as an object only.
right. One, an object for your use, another, an object of your wrath. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So on this first dialogue on chapter five and the book Refuting the Nonsense and Reclaiming the Truth, it's a dialogue of somebody who comes around and basically starts the dialogue by saying, you know, those guys over there, they're haters. And basically, I really want to do harm to them. And then
Yes.
Sophia, which of course means wisdom, says to him, wait a minute, I thought you said they were the haters. And so the whole thing is that can you, first of all, let me ask you this. Why do people immediately want to hate haters? And number two, is it supernatural to want to love haters? And what does that look like? What form does that take?
Well, the only supernatural example that I really have is Christ on the cross.
That's the
Um,
best. Yeah.
it's the it uh think about it. As they are hammering nails into his hands, Jesus is calling to the Father. He's saying, "But Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I cannot see myself, in Jesus's shoes at that moment in time and saying, "Forgive them." Um,
Yeah.
my first thing would want to be to either lash out or just shut down in pain.
Yeah. And the thing is, even if you're absolutely certain that they're in the wrong and they continuously do you harm, we're still called not to hate them. What form should that take? How do you not hate somebody who hates you?
Well, yeah, I would fall back on the standard definition of love. Wish them good. Um, One of the most difficult things I think for a lot of people is to wish good of their enemies. And I found a very useful practice is actually to pray for those that you consider to be your enemies. Actually, not pray that something bad will happen to them, but actually that
Yeah.
they good would happen to them. They would eventually wind up in heaven, you know?
So you're you're following what Jesus said. Pray for those who persecute you.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
and so you said we need to pray for their good. Now, I would imagine that includes, goods for their life here on earth, but ultimately and primarily it means, like you said, pray that eventually they do end up in heaven because that's the ultimate goal of life,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
that with people who hate, that usually means, praying for their repentance.
Well, another thing that I always go back on is when Jesus talks about removing the splinter in your brother's eye. You know, first you need to remove the log in your own eye, and I've always
Right.
taken that particular one to heart. And um, C.S. Lewis kind of uh, bouncing off of him or riffing off of him, he pointed to a person that you love even though they sin badly, and that person is yourself.
Good
So
point. Yeah.
and so if you actually look at it, if there's at least one example in your life of a person who you love them even though you hate the sin that they have committed, and that's yourself.
That's a
um
very good point, and usually with parents, that also includes their children. But yeah, and if we're called to love our neighbor as ourself, and we do just by subconsciously love ourselves, and somebody right now might be thinking, "What do you mean I love myself?" Well, you take care of yourself, you care for yourself. You get up in the morning, you eat breakfast or lunch or dinner, you brush your teeth, you do
right, you
care for.
aim for good, you
You
aim
might
for
not
good.
you might not like lots of, parts of yourself, but you
Right.
do love yourself. And so I guess that's what we're called to do for others, to love them despite not perhaps liking them or liking a lot about them.
Right. That is kind of very difficult, especially when you see a person who has terribly wronged you, and you need to actually go into kind of like a face-to-face
Yeah.
situation with them. It becomes very, very difficult for you not to act on your emotions at that particular moment in time, and actually be
Yeah.
uh, you know, gentle and merciful. It doesn't mean that you have to let them kind of walk over you.
I was about to say that gentle, merciful, and just.
Right.
You're not going, I mean, when Jesus said turn the other cheek, he was basically saying don't run away. I mean,
Right.
don't admit guilt if you're not guilty. Continue to stand for what you're standing for, despite whether they hit you in the face or not. And
Right.
so it takes strength to do what you're saying. It doesn't, you're not wimpy by loving your enemy. You're actually much stronger than somebody who
Right.
doesn't,
Right.
than somebody who just follows their passions.
When you turn, and I'm borrowing from Bishop Barron when he did the Catholicism series, he talked
Yeah.
about um, forget, it was a South African bishop. I can't remember his name. I'm not very good with names today. Um, who a bigot said, I don't make way for black men, you know, and or whatever, and he replied in the same way, well, I do, and is trying to throw it back to him. But basically, the story is about turning the other cheek or responding in a certain fashion, is that you are not going to turn into that person who just did something to you. So
Right.
when you
Right.
turn the other cheek, you're actually going back to them in their face and saying, "You're not going to change me by your unjust act against me."
Bingo. Bingo. And you know what? Our animal instinct is to fight or flight. Turning the other cheek is to stand firm, which is
Right.
much better, much higher than both of those, more animal instincts. Let's go to the second dialogue, which you said that you really liked. This one is simply called "You Don't Love Me," and it's a
Yeah.
dialogue between a young man and a young woman. Apparently, they're quote unquote dating or courting or however you want to put it. And it starts off, by the way, their names are Eric Eros and Angie Agape, because that's exactly what they stand for. One stands for Eros and the other Agape. And Eric Eros begins it with simply saying to his so-called girlfriend, "I love you." And Angie Agape says, "No, you don't." And that's how it begins. Want to take it from there?
Well,
I don't mean the following the dialogue. I mean what
right,
you got
right.
out of it.
Yes, yes. It there is, especially in our culture right now, we have a severe misunderstanding of what love is.
Yeah.
I love John Paul's quote from Love and Responsibility, and I think he was actually borrowing from the philosopher Kant, um, in saying persons are the objects of love, not of use. Meaning that you're not supposed to use a person, and very much in our sexually saturated uh, society these days, we really do find it hard not to view, especially people as objects of use.
Well, they're being made commodities through the
Right,
media. They're being made impersonal. I mean, where the natural order is to use things and love persons in the agape sense of love. I mean, our society tends to do the exact opposite, and that's what sin is all about: to love things and to use persons.
right. In a sense, love has been collapsed into a desire, a certain desire for.
Yeah,
Um, and I admit, as a human being, those desires can get very, very, very strong. You want
yeah,
those
and they're
desires.
not unnatural in as much
Right,
as we are, desires lead us to making certain decisions that continue life on the planet for the human race. But the whole thing, as we talked about earlier, is these desires need to be in accord with reason.
right.
And that's where, of course, sin and God's grace and the interplay come into play here. That's we must, with God's help, order our choices according to reason, not according to passion.
And just to go into, if we're not doing that,
Yeah,
it is disordered. And I think a lot of people get
yeah,
upset with the disordered word, in particular when we're talking about homosexuals. But love is disordered in so many ways, and it manifests itself in so many ways.
yeah. Now, this dialogue that you mentioned here, that we're talking about, isn't about homosexuals, even though there was a dialogue about
Right,
that. This one is simply about two people that are dating, male and female.
right. And
And,
what,
go ahead.
yeah, what is it comes down to the question of what does love really mean?
Yes.
And your dialogue highlights that very, very well. I've brought it up to other people. What if something happened to her? Because
Yeah.
usually it's guys who have this kind of infatuation that seems to take over, um, and
On the physical level.
on the physical
Yeah.
level. And you go, what would happen? What would happen if this woman got horribly disfigured, or
Yeah.
she was not, you mentioned that she became 70 pounds overweight, I believe, or something like that.
Yeah,
It's
or got into an accident, became a paraplegic.
yeah,
Um, there's a number of things that can happen to anybody, and this is why, for better or for worse, for sickness and in health, until death do you part, are part of the vows, the sacred vows of marriage. So the question is, should you be giving yourself away to somebody who has not made those sacred vows to
right.
you?
I posted one time on Facebook, a meme that had a picture of a ring, and it basically said commitment comes with a ring.
Yeah.
Because often people use commitment to say, okay, I'm going to be committed to this person for a temporary period of time, is what they really mean. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
uh, there's some sort of
Until, yeah.
exclusivity.
Until love fades, or
Right?
until my desires are on somebody else or with somebody else. And of course, this isn't love. Basically, it seems like the theme of this particular dialogue is if you have eros for somebody and it's not accompanied with agape, it soon evolves into or devolves into abuse.
Yeah.
I mean, agape, eros is a good, a natural stepping stone, but it has to be a stepping stone to agape.
Yeah. Pope Benedict the 16th had a great encyclical, based on uh, that God is love. And
Yeah.
the interesting thing is he talked both about eros and agape. And he said basically what you were saying is you can see that eros could be a stepping stone toward God. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily an evil thing.
No, it isn't.
And
It is
so
it is when abused, but it isn't in and
right.
of itself. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it actually could be a real positive good. And as we've mentioned, is we have these erotic desires
Yeah.
f-
We're
so
natural
that we would, yeah,
we're
so that
naturally
we,
attracted to the opposite sex in a proper ordered world in order to procreate and have families and continue the species because life is a good thing and it's God's will that life continue. So life and love are one. That's why at the beginning of my show I say where truth, life, and love are one because life is love giving and love is life giving and both are God and we are his image.
I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
this way is actually love, if you could see them all tied together.
yes. So the bottom line with this particular dialogue is that the guy wants to get more physically intimate with the girl, and the girl is saying, "Don't tell me you love me if you're trying to do this without being married to me, because that is not love. It's the opposite."
Right.
And it's so if if we weren't so devoid of reason in our day and age, this would again be obvious to people.
So properly understood, and especially in the Christian understanding of love,
Yeah,
love means a gift of self.
yeah, the total
an
gift of self
offering an offering of oneself
to the other.
and
Yeah.
to the other. And you brought that up before, and a lot of people kind of don't think of that. How can I totally offer myself to another when I've offered myself previously to someone else? And that becomes a real conundrum. How can you really do that? And I think, at least for guys of my generation, um, I can see that. I mean, virginity was still prized when I was growing up, um, especially by men. Uh, for whatever reason, we had a double
Right.
standard where you know
Oh,
guys
you mean
would do that.
virginity for a woman was prized by
Yes,
men? Yeah.
yes.
It looks like we're my
We have 10
Zoom is
minutes
saying
left.
we only have a few minutes left, but anyway, let's continue.
Okay.
We'll deal with that when it comes.
All right.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that it's, love is meant, or marital love, the marital type love is meant to be a total self-giving of body and soul. And
Right.
if it's given away to somebody else before marriage, then, are you diminished in that marital respect in fully, completely, and uniquely giving your total self to another? And that's a question I think more people need to ponder and to contemplate.
Yes, yes. And I think we might take off something that you had done. I remember a long, long time ago, you had given marriage advice to a couple discerning marriage, and you said, um, until you love God first, and your spouse to be next, and yourself third, you're not ready to be married.
Wow, what a sage.
That was very, but it stuck with me. It strikes me as so wise.
Yeah, yeah,
And this is the essence of what Christianity is talking about as well.
no question.
Um,
If you
and
want, if you want a good marriage, if you want a good marriage, not just, you know, something that you get into and you know, trudge yourself through. If you want a good marriage, you need to find somebody who loves God more than you. Period.
yeah,
If you don't find that, it'll be a marriage, but it'll be more like an arrangement.
right.
Yeah,
And you see it in the two great commandments. The two great
yeah,
commandments are commandments of love. And the first commandment really emphasizes it's in the Old Testament, love your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your strength. I mean,
yes,
this is more than just, loving God in a spiritual sort of sense, detached. This is an incarnational sort of loving of God. It's an
yeah,
offering of ourselves totally and wholly. And we see that. I love this image. We see this on the cross. I mean,
yeah,
Jesus did die for us, but he also died for the Father as well. He
yeah.
he was giving God this offering that humanity was not able to make. And so
Right,
he made it
right. So
for
he
us.
offered his humanity by becoming incarnate. And,
Yes.
you know, and since he was also God, with the power of God, he offered humanity to the Father as a sacrifice in atonement for our sins. And that's really the heart of what Christianity is.
But it is also an example. I remember when I first started as a catechist, and my
Mm.
seventh graders they can really get wild. This is a time of change for them. And they were all I was kind of losing control. And actually, the topic was about love. And I said, "Do you want to know what love is?" I said it like in
Yeah.
such a way that it resounded, and I got their attention. And behind me, because this was a Catholic school, I went and I pointed to the crucifix. That's love. And all their little eyes, they just went wide. They
Yeah,
encountered, I don't
that's
know if they
awesome.
understood it, but they encountered something that was very startling and shocking. And that is love right there. If you want to know what love is, look at Jesus on the cross.
Yes. Kind of reminds me, I don't, just tangentially of that old Foreigner song. I want to know what love is.
Yeah,
Well, look behind you if you're in a Catholic school. That's where,
right.
or if you're in a
Or
Christian home, you'll find it. It's the cross.
yes, just look at the cross. Yeah.
And you know, the question is, how much are we sacrificing ourselves to others, even those who uh, are our enemies, and particularly those who we are attracted to? How are we sacrificing our passions for their greater good and waiting for that commitment of for better or for worse to, you know, to give ourselves to each other? What we need to contemplate here. We
You
only
want
have a
to talk
couple
about
minutes
Peter
left.
and John
What was
in
that?
John 21?
Yeah,
You want
yeah,
to
yeah.
talk about
That's we only have a couple minutes left. Um, you've done a lot of research and because you're very interested in John 21, 15 through 17, and that is the little conversation, the post-resurrection conversation that Jesus had with Peter about Simon, do you love me?
right?
Uh, Let me just read. Basically, it's three different sections. The first section is Simon, son of John, do you agape me more than these? That's what Jesus was saying. He used the, you know, the English word love, but he meant agape love. And Peter says what?
He says, "No, Lord, I filio love you."
Yeah, I filio love you. So I
Yes,
friendship love you. I don't
right.
fully, totally, and sacrificially
So
love
that's
you.
the highest level
Friendship.
because
Yeah,
Jesus is asking because he's here are a whole bunch of disciples right there with Jesus and Peter. He's
right.
saying, "Do you love me more than these folks here?" So that's the highest level. He's
Yeah.
asking Peter, "Do you love me more than anyone else?" And
Yeah, and I
Peter,
also think he's probably pointing to what just happened to him on the cross and thinking,
yeah,
do you love me like I love you? But anyway,
right.
do you love me more than these? Do you agape me more than these?
Can
And
I
he
can I
says,
can I set up a little bit more?
we don't have time. We're about to get cut off by Zoom. But go ahead, really quick.
So before his crucifixion, I mean, Peter said he would die for Jesus. He'd do
Yes.
anything for him. But then it turns out he denies Jesus 3 times. And that's
Yes.
significant for what we're reading right now.
Because he's about to say he loves him three times. And
Right.
okay. And so the second one, then Jesus says, feed my lambs. I find that very interesting. I'll tell you that in a
Right.
second. Then of course Jesus says again, Simon son of John, do you agape me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I filio you. So
Right.
again, same thing. Um, and then instead of feed my lambs, Jesus says, tend my sheep.
Right.
Do you have any thought about the difference between feed my lambs and tend my
I
sheep?
I don't think there's any real difference. I think all of these responses by Jesus are reestablishing Peter as the leader of the
Right. But
apostles.
but but would you say that lambs have to do with the faithful and sheep have to do with the ordained? Maybe
Maybe
because
that's an
lambs are younger sheep. You know what I mean?
right, right,
Okay. Feed my lambs and then tend my sheep. And then the third stanza is Simon, son of John, do you philia me? Jesus goes from agape to philia. And, distressed that Jesus asked him a third time, he says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I filio you.
right. Peter's distressed because he's been saying, yes, I do feel you love you, but Jesus is asking the question, and it's almost as if he's saying, really, Peter, do you really filial love me? Because it's you have to take the backdrop here. Did he show that brotherly love for Jesus when he denied him 3 times?
Good question.
There's that's weighing heavily upon Peter's mind at this point in time.
Yeah.
And right after the what happens is that Jesus tells him that he will be led in a way there where he doesn't want to go, and John uh,
Hmm.
editorially says Jesus was pointing to a prophecy of what would happen to Peter, that Peter would be martyred
Right.
for Jesus. And so, yes, eventually Peter did do this, but it was only by the grace of God that he did do this.
Yes. And it's by the grace of God that we're able to agape rather than simply have an attraction love, filio,
Right.
our eros, our friendship love. On that note, unfortunately, we have to go. Time is running out, but this was a fun little show to have on love, chapter 5 of my book, Refuting the Nonsense and Reclaiming the Truth, a book that is a very easy read, and you can find it on Amazon.com. Look up either the title or my name or both. Mr. Robert LeBlanc, thank you so much for again being a guest on Beneath the Surface.
Thank you, Paul. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, can't wait for our next show together. On that note, have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Beneath the Surface.